Practice. 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 That old adage that practice makes perfect, that's actually not true. Practice makes permanent. Perfect practice makes perfect. So you have to practice carefully, you have to practice slowly. Make sure when you're practicing that you're going back and fixing things. I have students all the time that learn stuff wrong because they went home and they practiced and they didn't take the time to really figure it out, and all they did was they played from the beginning to end for half an hour in a session, and they played from the beginning to the end of a piece, beginning to the end, beginning to the end, beginning to the end, learning all the mistakes as they go. You have to practice slowly and carefully and sort out all the notes and all the in-between stuff and learn it and then go faster. So what do you practice? Practice your scales. Practice your audition piece. And practice sight reading. Mr. Heisey, how do you practice sight reading? Well, you and your teacher, or you yourself, or your child and their teacher, or your child and whoever, sit with music that you've never seen before, and you read through it the first time, taking a look at the time signature and the key signature, and you play through it once and do the best that you possibly can. That's how you practice sight reading. It's an acquired skill. It's something that takes practice. If you don't practice sight reading, you won't get any better at it. There are those of us, and I happen to be one of the lucky ones, I've always been able to sight read. I never had to work at it very hard. I was lucky. There's some other people that can't sight read if you threaten them or something. But those people can learn how to sight read if they do it all the time. And it's a learned skill just like everything else. And once you get more comfortable with your instrument, it gets easier and easier. But it's an important part of the audition, which I will talk about in a minute. Tune your instrument. I can't tell you how many numbers of auditions I see where a kid walks in and the instrument's in, I don't know, it's not in the key that it's supposed to be in. The strings are all over the place. They play, I don't know, pick an instrument. Flute plays an A and it's a F sharp or something. Like, just so out of tune you can't imagine. Playing on an instrument that is out of tune will have an impact on your entire audition. Because intonation is a big deal. It's a big deal. And so if your instrument isn't set up the way it's supposed to be, then your entire audition is going to be out of tune. And it may not be your fault, but tough. You've got to tune your instrument. If you need help tuning your instrument, that's fine. Hand it to me. Hand it to somebody before you walk in the door. If you can't tune it yourself, get it tuned. Really important. Because then you're sort of leveling the playing field. If you play out of tune after that, that's your own problem. But if your instrument is out of tune when you start, you're sunk, right? Okay. What happens when you walk into the audition room? Well, we ask everybody to play a scale. Depending on what your level is and where you are, it's 1, 2, or 3 octaves. Up to, depending on what level you were in, up to 4 sharps and 4 flats. Every year I have a couple kids that walk in and say, Mr. Heisey, I prepared an F sharp major scale. Well, that's great, but what if I don't want to hear an F sharp major scale? It's wonderful that you prepared one, but that tells me that you prepared one. I need to know that you can play scales in different keys that you haven't prepared. Chances are, if you tell me that you prepared an F sharp major scale, I'll have you play that, but then I'm going to ask you to play another one. Because I want to see if you know your scales. Because music is scales and arpeggios. That's all it is, in different patterns and different keys. So I need to know that you can play scales and arpeggios, whether you're in string orchestra or principal orchestra. So know that it's okay to prepare a scale, but if you walk in and say, I prepared C sharp minor, great, play a C sharp minor scale. I'm going to ask you to play another one. okay? This is the audition form that we use. So when you walk in, I'll say play a scale. And it says major scale, major scale. So I write, let's just say for the sake of argument, D major scale. Number of octaves. And you get a point for the number of octaves that you play. So if it's a 3-octave scale, you get 3 points. Tone. What your instrument sounds like. Do you have a good tone? Do you have a bad tone? Is it loud? Is it strong? Does it have body to it? Is it weak? Is it scratchy? Is it thin? Whatever it is. And we do rate that on a scale of 1 to 3. Fingering. I look at your fingerings. Did you know the fingering? Did you do the proper fingering, or did you make it up as you went along? Okay? There are prescribed fingerings for certain scales on all instruments. There are whole Bibles, big fat scale books that people play out of. For better or for worse, I know most of the prescribed fingerings, so you're not going to hide from me. And you get 1, 2, or 3 points for tone, 1, 2, or 3 points for fingering, and then intonation. Did you play your scale in tune, or was it out of tune? 1, 2, or 3 points, depending. 3 being the most you can get, right? Then, if I ask you for a second scale, we can do that again.